The boardroom's tension could have been cut with a knife as Mason Hayes, 32, stood his ground before Vanessa Sterling, the formidable CEO of Horizon Innovations. "With all due respect, Ms. Sterling," Mason said, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "my age and family situation aren't liabilities, they're my greatest strengths." No one had ever spoken to Vanessa like that in her 15 years running the company. The silence that followed would change both their lives forever. If you've ever felt underestimated or faced judgment for your personal circumstances, this story will resonate deeply with you. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to see more powerful real-life stories of courage and transformation that rarely make headlines. Mason Hayes had never planned on raising his daughter alone. 4 years ago, he was a mid-level marketing executive with a promising career and a wife he adored. Then came the diagnosis that rewrote their future: aggressive breast cancer that took Sarah from him and their daughter Zoe in just 8 months. At 28, Mason became both mother and father to their 3-year-old daughter, navigating grief while trying to maintain some semblance of stability. The modest home they shared in a Minneapolis suburb became Mason's sanctuary and battlefield. Each morning began before dawn, preparing Zoe's lunch, selecting clothes that a now 7-year-old girl would deem acceptable, and reviewing his presentation materials before his daughter awoke. Their morning routine was a carefully choreographed dance of efficiency and affection, perfected through years of necessity. "Is today the big day, Daddy?" Zoe asked, her cereal spoon hovering midway to her mouth, milk threatening to drip onto her purple unicorn pajamas. "It is, Pumpkin," Mason replied, straightening his tie for the 4th time that morning. "Mrs. Abernathy will pick you up from school, and I'll get you from her house as soon as my meeting's done. Will you tell the fancy company people about our weekend pancake tradition?" Zoe inquired seriously, as though this might be the deciding factor in his potential employment. Mason chuckled, kneeling to her level. "I'll save that for when they offer me the job. It'll be our secret weapon." After dropping Zoe at school, Mason drove downtown to Horizon Innovations' gleaming headquarters. The company had revolutionized medical technology over the past decade, creating affordable diagnostic tools that were changing healthcare across the country. The position, head of community outreach and marketing, would mean better pay, better hours, and most importantly, comprehensive health insurance that would cover Zoe's asthma treatments without the crippling copays he currently faced. "Mr. Hayes, welcome to Horizon," greeted Thomas Chen, the HR director who'd been corresponding with Mason throughout the interview process. "The team is excited to meet you." For the next hour, Mason presented his vision for expanding Horizon's community presence and making their revolutionary medical devices accessible to underserved populations. His proposal combined emotional storytelling with hard data on market expansion, a balance he'd perfected in his current role at a smaller healthcare company. The executive team seemed impressed. Questions came thoughtfully, and Mason answered each with the confidence of someone who had researched the company extensively during late nights after Zoe's bedtime. He was beginning to feel hopeful when the conference room door opened, and Vanessa Sterling walked in. At 47, Vanessa had built Horizon from a startup to a billion-dollar company. Known for her brilliant mind and exacting standards, she had a reputation for being brutally direct. Her tailored charcoal suit and perfectly styled silver-streaked bob projected authority without effort. "So you're Mason Hayes," she said, skimming his resume as she took her seat at the head of the table. "Your proposal is compelling. But I have concerns." Mason felt his stomach tighten. "I'm happy to address any questions about my approach, Ms. Sterling." "It's not about your approach. It's about your situation." Her blue eyes fixed on him with laser focus. "This role requires dedication and flexibility. Late nights, weekend events, occasional travel. Your file indicates you're a single father to a young child. And frankly, you seem quite young yourself. How old are you? 32, Mason answered, feeling the room's energy shift uncomfortably. 32, Vanessa repeated, as though confirming a suspicion. And solely responsible for a child. That's my concern. The last person in this position burned out in 6 months, and she didn't have the complications of single parenthood. Aren't you a bit young to handle both this position and raising a child alone? Do you really think you can manage? The question hung in the air, wrapped in assumptions that Mason had encountered countless times since Sarah's death. The pitying looks from several team members made his neck burn. He thought about the nights spent researching healthcare innovations while monitoring Zoe's breathing during asthma flare-ups. The client calls taken from hospital waiting rooms. The presentations prepared on playground benches while Zoe made friends with other children. Mason took a deep breath and made a decision. He could give the safe answer, assurances about his childcare arrangements and time management skills. Or he could speak his truth. Ms. Sterling, he began, his voice quiet but firm, I appreciate your candor, so I'll respond in kind. He placed his hands flat on the table and leaned forward slightly. 4 years ago, I watched my wife die of a disease your company is now creating diagnostic tools to detect earlier. For 245 days, I worked full-time, cared for our daughter, and spent every possible moment at Sarah's side through treatments that ultimately failed. I learned to function on 3 hours of sleep, to make critical decisions under impossible pressure, and to create joy for a 3-year-old whose mother was disappearing before her eyes. The room had gone completely still. Since then, I've maintained a full-time career while raising my daughter alone. I've never missed a deadline. I've grown my current company's community engagement by 37% year over year. I've built systems and support networks that ensure both my professional responsibilities and my daughter's needs are met with excellence. Mason paused, gathering his thoughts. But here's what's most relevant to Horizon. I understand your mission at a level most marketing executives never will. When you talk about early detection saving lives, I know exactly what that means. When you discuss making healthcare accessible, I think of families like mine who choose between medication and mortgage payments. Your company's work isn't abstract to me, it's deeply personal. His gaze held Vanessa's steadily now. So when you ask if I'm too young or too encumbered to handle responsibility, I have to wonder if you're asking the right question. Perhaps the better question is whether someone without my experiences could possibly bring the same passion, perspective, and purpose to this role. Mason hadn't raised his voice, but his words seemed to fill the entire room. He braced himself for the backlash that would likely follow challenging Vanessa Sterling's judgment. What happened next stunned everyone present. Vanessa set down his resume and studied him with a completely different expression, one of genuine curiosity rather than skepticism. You know, she said after a long moment, I founded this company when my father was dying of a heart condition that a simple test could have detected earlier. The doctors told me he could have had 10 more years if they'd caught it sooner. She tapped her manicured fingers on the table. Everyone in this room knows that story. It's part of our company lore. She glanced around at her executive team before returning her gaze to Mason. What they don't know is that I was also raising my 16-year-old sister after our mother abandoned us. I was 27, trying to launch a medical startup while essentially parenting a teenager through high school. Every investor I approached questioned whether I could manage both responsibilities. Several suggested I was too young, too female, too burdened to succeed. A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Vanessa rarely shared personal details. Mr. Hayes, I owe you an apology, she continued. I just subjected you to the same prejudice I fought against for years. Worse, I did it knowingly, as a test of sorts. I wanted to see how you'd respond to that particular pressure. Mason's confusion must have shown on his face because Vanessa actually smiled. Community outreach isn't just about marketing, Mr. Hayes. It's about authentically representing our mission to people who need our products but don't trust the medical establishment. It's about connecting with patients and families going through the worst moments of their lives. It requires someone who can speak that truth because they've lived it. She closed his file decisively. The position is yours if you want it. And I'd like to discuss adjusting some of our company policies around flexible work arrangements for all employees with caregiving responsibilities. Perhaps you could provide some insight from your experience. The meeting concluded with handshakes and details about the offer to follow. As Mason gathered his materials, Thomas Chen approached him quietly. That was something else, the HR director said. You should know that Vanessa has never admitted to being wrong about a candidate assessment before. Or shared personal details in an interview. You've made quite an impression. Outside in his car, Mason sat for a moment before driving to pick up Zoe. He checked his phone to find a text from Mrs. Abernathy with a photo of his daughter proudly holding up an art project, a construction paper family with two figures, one tall and one small, surrounded by a heart. "For Daddy's new job," was written across the bottom in her teacher's handwriting, with Zoe's wobbly signature beneath. The emotion he'd held in check throughout the interview finally surfaced. Mason leaned his forehead against the steering wheel and let the tears come, for Sarah, for the struggles of the past 4 years, for the validation of hearing someone acknowledge the strength rather than the liability of his circumstances. The following weeks brought significant changes. Mason accepted Horizon's offer, which included flexibility he hadn't dared hope for. More surprisingly, Vanessa appointed him to co-lead a new initiative on workplace support for employees with caregiving responsibilities. "Daddy, why does your new boss lady want to meet me?" Zoe asked one evening as Mason helped her pick out an outfit for the company's Family Day picnic, an event that hadn't existed before his hiring. "Because you're my secret superpower," he explained, zipping up her favorite dress. "And she wants to see what makes our team so special." At the picnic, Mason watched in amazement as the formidable Vanessa Sterling sat cross-legged on a blanket, listening intently as Zoe explained the complexities of second-grade social dynamics. The CEO who could intimidate healthcare executives with a glance was nodding seriously at his daughter's earnest analysis. "Your daughter is remarkable," Vanessa told him when Zoe ran off to play. "Articulate, confident, kind to the other children. That doesn't happen by accident, especially after such loss. She makes it easy to be a good parent," Mason replied. "She gives me purpose when everything else seems impossible." Vanessa nodded. "That's precisely what I hoped to hear. Because purpose, real, personal purpose, is what drives innovation. It's what separates companies that create products from those that change lives." 6 months into his role at Horizon, Mason found himself in Vanessa's office discussing the unexpected success of their patient advocacy program, an initiative born from his own experiences navigating Sarah's illness. "The board is impressed with the numbers," Vanessa said, reviewing the quarterly report. "But I'm more impressed with the stories. We're connecting with families in a way we never have before." Mason nodded. "When people see themselves reflected in our messaging, when they feel truly understood, they trust us differently." "I've been thinking about our first meeting," she said, setting aside the report. "About what you said regarding your experiences being an asset rather than a liability." "I hope I've proven that to be true," Mason said. "Beyond question. Which is why I'd like you to help us revamp our entire hiring philosophy." If we've overlooked talent like yours because of circumstances rather than capabilities, who else might we be missing? Single parents, caregivers, people with chronic illnesses or disabilities who understand our end users better than anyone, these perspectives are invaluable in healthcare. The initiative became a secondary focus for Mason, alongside his primary role. He worked with HR to identify and eliminate bias in job descriptions, interview questions, and evaluation criteria. They created mentorship programs for employees with caregiving responsibilities and flexible work policies that accommodated life's unpredictable nature. The results were transformative. Within 18 months, Horizon's workforce diversity had increased significantly, employee retention improved by 24%, and their community engagement metrics reached unprecedented levels. Most telling was the patient satisfaction data. People felt seen and understood by Horizon in ways that distinguished them from every competitor. "You've created quite a legacy here," Thomas told Mason at the company's annual retreat, where Zoe was teaching the CEO's teenage niece how to make friendship bracelets. Vanessa can't stop talking about the culture shift. Mason watched as his daughter confidently explained her technique, remembering the shy, grief-stricken child she had been just a few years earlier. "It's not just about me," he replied. "It's about recognizing that people's fullest humanity, their challenges, their losses, their responsibilities, often creates their greatest contributions." 2 years after that fateful interview, Mason received an unexpected honor, Horizon's inaugural Compassionate Innovation Award, presented by Vanessa herself at the company's annual gala. "True innovation isn't just about technology," Vanessa said to the assembled employees and healthcare partners. "It's about perspective, about seeing opportunities and solutions where others see only problems." Mason Hayes didn't just bring marketing expertise to Horizon, he brought lived experience that has fundamentally changed how we connect with the communities we serve and how we nurture the talents within our own walls. Standing at the podium, award in hand, Mason looked out at the faces, colleagues who had become friends, mentors, and supporters. In the front row, Zoe sat beside Mrs. Abernathy, both beaming with pride. "When I walked into Horizon for my interview 2 years ago, I was prepared to defend my professional qualifications," he began. "What I wasn't prepared for was being asked to defend my life circumstances, or discovering that those very circumstances would become the foundation for the work I'm most proud of today." He paused, gathering his thoughts. We all carry unseen stories. Challenges that have shaped us. Responsibilities that have grown us beyond what we thought possible. The true measure of a company, of a society, isn't in avoiding those who carry such complexities. It's in recognizing that those complexities often create the very insights and innovations we most desperately need. Mason caught Zoe's eye and winked at her. "My daughter recently asked me a question I couldn't immediately answer. She said, 'Daddy, why do grown-ups sometimes think that having different jobs in life makes you better at work, but having different experiences in life makes you worse?' And I realized she'd identified something profound about how we often value professional diversity but fear personal complexity." He looked directly at Vanessa now. "What I've experienced at Horizon is the opposite of that fear. Here, I've seen what happens when we honor the whole person, when we recognize that someone's greatest challenges often forge their greatest strengths. When we make space for people's full humanity, we get their full brilliance in return." As applause filled the room, Mason thought about the journey from that tense boardroom confrontation to this moment of celebration. He thought about Sarah, who would never see the woman their daughter was becoming or know how their shared tragedy had ultimately created this opportunity to help others. Later that evening, as he tucked an overtired Zoe into bed, she asked drowsily, "Are you proud of yourself, Daddy?" "Because I'm proud of you." Mason smoothed her hair back from her forehead, thinking about all they had endured and all they had built together. "I'm proud of us, sweetheart," he answered truthfully. "We make a pretty amazing team." As he closed her bedroom door, Mason reflected on the shocking response he'd given to a CEO who questioned his capability, a response that had come from a place of truth, pain, and the quiet strength that parenthood and loss had taught him. He couldn't have known then how far that moment of authenticity would reach, how many lives it would touch, how many doors it would open. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is speak our truth, even when it challenges assumptions. In doing so, we don't just change minds, we can change entire systems. Mason had learned that our deepest wounds often become our most profound gifts, not just to those we love, but to the world we hope to improve. And that is the true power of lived experience, not just to survive adversity, but to transform it into purpose that illuminates paths for others to follow. If this story moved you, remember that authentic voices like Mason's are changing workplaces and communities every day. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us how one person's courage to speak their truth can create ripples of change that touch countless lives. Sometimes the most shocking responses are simply the honest words the world needs most to hear.